back with Clerks 2. It's been 10 years since the cult classic, and he joins us now. The first question, Kevin, has to be, are you sitting comfortably?
I am about as comfortable as I can be in a hotel chair, sir.
Okay, good stuff, because there was recent stories, it made us laugh a lot in the office about when you were working recently as a juror in LA. They let you stand up in the jury box.
Yeah, I was nursing an anal fissure at that point, which was about you were just listening to the talk of the snakes biting bums and whatnot. Nothing
Similar.
could compare to an anal fissure. You show me a movie called Anal Fissure on a plane, terrifying. Terrifying. 5 hours of having to sit when you can't, terrifying.
Well, listen, so many emails coming into the show of people who, I mean, there was someone was telling me a story recently about 2 Edinburgh shows. One's Kevin Smith, one's Sigourney Weaver, and I don't have to tell you the one that sold out first. So Clerks 2, what have Randall and Dante been doing for almost 12 years?
A whole hell of a lot of nothing. Like basically, they've been keeping on. They've found their comfy little place, and they never really left it, which was the convenience store, until it burns down in the beginning of this movie, and then they're kind of forced to go out into the real world.
Why revisit them now with so much in between? Was it something you were always going to come back to at the right time?
Nah, it was never really a foregone conclusion that I'd do a Clerks 2. Like it was never like one day I'm gonna get there. It just there was a kind of confluence of events, and one of which was working on the Clerks 10 DVD and falling in love with the characters again. Another was coming off of Jersey Girl, where I was like, man, I don't want to work with movie stars on the next movie, and I want to do something kind of low budget. It was me wanting to tell a story about what I felt like it was like to be in my 30s, and realizing, well, Dante and Randall were the stars of what I felt like it was like to be in my 20s film. Why not use those guys as the way in again? And just a nice way to kind of close up the View Askew universe, that interconnected series of movies, more so than Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, to go out with Dante and Randall, the guys who brought us into it in the first place.
Is there a temptation to make Clerks 2 in exactly the same way as you made Clerks? In terms of budget, especially? I mean, Clerks was made on credit cards.
Yeah, pretty much credit cards. It was $27,575, and initially, I was thinking about making Clerks 2 for more along the lines of the Chasing Amy budget, which was $250,000. And it was Scott Mosier, my producer, who was just like, dude, we can't do that anymore. He's like, you don't seem to understand. Like now, back in the day, it was easy to pull that thing off for nothing, but now people know that we have like a studio behind us. Nobody wants to work for free. Yeah, it's like you can't ask people to do that, especially with the crew we work with. We've worked with them on a lot of flicks, and he's like, sooner or later somebody is going to make a lot of money off this movie, and like you're asking this crew to do it for nothing so that these guys can kind of walk away with a bunch of cash at the end of the day, the studio side. So he's like, let's do it for a comfortable amount, and $5 million was kind of the figure that we settled on. And it sounds like a bunch of cash, particularly in regards to the first budget, but very low by any studio standard.
That's the equivalent of one snake, I reckon. As simple as that, Kevin.
Exactly. One of those CG snakes, man, might have cost $5 million.
You brought the Red Bank series almost in a complete loop with this film, and with Jay and Silent Bob Strikes Back. Where in the world are you going to take them now?
I think I'm done with them. I think Clerks 2 is kind of the way to go out. Get out while the getting's good. To go from Clerks to Clerks 2, it feels like a nice sense of closure, like a book you want to close and put up on the shelf. And next up, I want to do a horror movie instead, do a complete left turn.
Great. Now obviously afternoon and all that's on the radio, but Clerks had the habit of throwing something quite grotesque in your face from nowhere. Whose idea was the Silence of the Lambs takeoff in Clerks 2?
That was mine, just because Jason Mewes had been doing that tuck thing forever, even long before I'd seen Silence of the Lambs. So much so that when me and my friend Brian Johnson went to see Silence of the Lambs, and Buffalo Bill does that tuck thing, we were like, he's doing a Mewes. And so for years, I'd been threatening to Jason, who still does it from time to time. He'll be like, hey, and you look over and there he is, fully tucked. I said, dude, one day I'm going to put that in a flick. And then I ran out of ideas, and so I did put it in a flick. And he was like, dude, I'm not going to do that on camera. I said, why not? You do it all the time for free. You might as well get paid for it. And he said, well, I'm going to start working out then. I got to start doing a bunch of sit-ups. And I was like, dude, you do as many sit-ups you want. I don't think it's going to make it any longer. You know what I'm saying? That's not what sit-ups are for. And he's like, no, dude, I want my stomach to be all ripped if I'm going to take my shirt off. I'm like, you're going to show your gear in the movie, and you're more worried about, how people look at your stomach. And he's like, well, my gear is going to be tucked. And I was like, my God, I've been outwitted by Jason Mewes.
And you're in trouble with that.
Yeah, really.
Well, Mark Kermode, Kevin Smith's something of a hero to student filmmakers. Have you seen a low budget film to rival Clerks since Clerks, Mark? And you've seen every film that's ever been made.
Well, it's really interesting. I remember when I first saw Clerks, and I wrote a piece about it for Q magazine over here in the UK, and I laughed until I hurt. And one of the things that we did was we transcribed one of the scenes from the movie, a scene which I can't describe on daytime radio. And I said, it was the most pornographic movie I'd ever seen without there being any sex in it whatsoever. And it was kind of like, it reminded me of the first time I saw a film of Richard Pryor in concert. It was the way in which, verbal humor could just transgress just about everything. And I really did think that Clerks was not just an extraordinary calling card, but a great movie in its own right. It was and it really does stand the test of time. What's interesting with Clerks 2, and this may well be an age thing. I mean, Kevin was talking about being 30. I'm in my mid-40s now, so I'm older than those people. And I saw Clerks 2 here in America in a cinema which the audience, I suppose, they were largely 17, 18, 19, maybe 20 people who may not have seen the first Clerks movie. And what was interesting for me was, regardless of whether one thinks it's as funny as the first one or whatever, there's a sense of affectionately revisiting characters. And it seemed to me, and Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong with this, it seemed to me that the prime reason for the movie existing was that you just actually wanted to spend more time with those people, because despite the fact that the American critic Joel Siegel said that it was the first movie he'd walked out of in 30 years because he was so offended by some of the, some of the language. I have to say, making a movie that Joel Siegel walks out, I think that in itself should go on the poster.
Achievement, should be an award for that.
Yeah,
it is.
There's an honor there.
But it did seem to me that the prime moving force in it is actually you just wanted to get back with those characters, and I felt that kind of odd nostalgia. Oh, look, that's what they look like now. They're kind of grown up. They're a little fat around the edges. They're still the same guys. They're still the same dopey no-hopers, and they're still capable of talking the same rubbish. But there's an affection there rather than, a kind of caustic thing.
Yeah, very much so. It was like me wanting to kind of extend that story by one chapter, just look in on them years later. Because I was thinking about writing this movie about what I felt like it was like to be in my 30s, and I was like, man, it takes a whole different dimension if you're showing characters that people know and taking them forward. I don't know, what I had to say was impacted a bit more by the fact that we know what Dante and Randall looked like 12 years ago, and now we know what they look like today. I mean, the unspoken star, the uncredited star of the first Clerks was its grungy black and white look. Without it, like, the movie couldn't be what it is. The uncredited, unspoken star of Clerks 2 is the gut, the paunch, because everybody's got one.
Yeah.
Brian O'Halloran's got one, Jeff Anderson's got one, I've got one. It's just weird and kind of oddly wonderful to see these dudes just being their age, like being in their mid-30s and having that kind of paunch going on for them. There's something poignant about the whole thing.
There was a couple of things in particular with the film, what's happened between Clerks and Clerks 2, and one of those is 3 more Star Wars movies, and something you feel very passionate about. Hayden Christensen gets a bit of a bashing in Clerks 2, and Lord of the Rings comes into it, 2 nuts in that. Do you think, just going off piece a second, that George Lucas did fumble the ball making the 3 Star Wars movies as a nut of the films yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so not the guy to ask, because I love those first 3 movies he made, but I was inclined to love them because I grew up watching them, as a kid. That was our mythology. And I remember when the first prequel came out, the Phantom Menace, you had a bunch of people on the internet who went from being insanely passionate and enthusiastic about the idea of a prequel to people like screaming out, George Lucas raped my childhood, and you're like, what? That's a bit overstatement, isn't it? And I don't know. I didn't go into the movie, that whole second trilogy, expecting anything, because I was like, there's no way that these movies are going to hit me the same way that those movies hit me when I was a kid. I was a kid, when I saw Star Wars, Empire, and Return of the Jedi. And, I regard them very affectionately in my adulthood, the way I regard things from my youth that still mean something to me, or were such a big deal to me when I was a kid. But there was no way that, like, Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, or Sith were ever going to hit me or wash over me in the same way. So I didn't go in with big expectations, and because of that, I was fine with those movies. Like, I thought they got progressively better as he went on. I thought Clones was better than Phantom Menace, and I thought Sith was better than the two combined. But I don't know, it's so weird watching people react to those. People my same age who would come out and be so outraged by them.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I don't know. I mean, the movie the audience that those movies were intended for, kids, really seemed to dig them. Like, I saw that first movie with a bunch of kids, and none of them were going like, Jar Jar Binks is the worst character ever created. They thought Jar Jar was funny and stuff. So it's all relative. It's all like who the movie's directed at.
And when you watch it, listen, I don't want you to go before 4 without mentioning Murray in Glasgow and Dean Fuller, and also Jenny in Kilmarnock. Thank you very much for all your emails and texts coming in about Kevin. You have a lot of fans out there. One thing, what's up is superhero film projects, Superman. One of your scripts, Wonder Woman, Green Hornet, getting loads of texts coming in about that. I was thinking, if there was ever, there's a lot of remakes of superhero movies and new stages of superhero movies. What about a new superhero? I think if anyone out there could invent a new superhero genre, it's yourself, Kevin.
Oh, you give me far too much credit. I mean, have you seen my body of work? What would lead you to believe that I could do such a thing?
Absolutely.
Somebody out there, somebody is, who's maybe listening to the show, or not even listening to the show because they're too busy scrolling things down on a piece of paper, has reinvented the superhero movie, and one day we're going to see it. I don't think we're going to see it anytime too soon, though, because studio wants to stick with what works, and what works is the year one storyline, this typical story arc that we're used to seeing. So it's going to be a while before somebody reinvents it. I mean, the last best stab at it, and people that did actually achieve that reinvention of the superhero genre, the superhero movie, was The Matrix.
Yeah.
But Matrix 2 and Matrix 3 better left not spoken about, I guess.
Very much not, and we'll not start Mark Kermode on those either. Kevin, thank you very much. Last question. All said and done, when you look back, a sequel is always dangerous. A sequel is always your second child, I suppose. And are you very glad you made it? Any regrets of making Clerks 2 12 years later?
Yeah, none for me, man. I love it. It's the one of all the flicks we've made, it's my favorite to date. I don't. If nobody liked it, if it didn't, right now in the States we're coming up on doing about 5 times what it cost us to make. We got great critical notices for it. Even if none of that existed and everyone hated the movie, I would still love it because, man, it really just speaks to me. It's one of the 5 best decisions I made was to make Clerks 2.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Silent Bob. You have a lovely day, yeah?
You as well.
All right, take care. Mark, I'm very much looking forward to seeing it. A good place to leave the films today. 2 hours sleep. How are you feeling? How you got through that magnificently?
Well, I'm feeling pretty good. I mean, like I said, the most sleep I got was during the boring bits of Snakes on a Plane, of which there were plenty.